There is a doctor in the room, but it's not me. That's right. Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. We're starting at the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Beis, about 12 lines from the bottom. I hope you know the previous couple of blot well. There's a lot of intersecting and overlapping sugyas here, and I would actually really appreciate that if you. So we're really leaning heavily on the last couple of mishnayos that we have. There's a mishnah on the bottom of Pei Zayin, where we saw a whole bunch of things about a husband who. About cases about pogemis ksuvasa and cases about meida where there was a witness. So we're going to be analyzing still some of those cases. So let's get started with with the first of today's cases, 10 lines from the bottom. We had said in our Mishnah that eid echad meida shehi prua. If there is one aid that testifies that she already paid, so then she has to make a shvuah if she is to collect. That's what the Mishnah had said. And the Gemara says from here, Savar Rami Bar Chama Lamemar Shvua Deoraisa. He seems to say that this should be a Shvua Deoraisa. After all, the pasuk reads, Lo yakum eid echad beish l'chol avonu l'chol chatas. And the drush of this pasuk is l'chol avonu l'chol chatas hu de'eino kam. In regards to an avon and a chatas, really what the pasuk is talking about is onshin. So in regards to onshin, there we say de'eino kam. There's no requirement for a shvua. Aval kamhu l'shvua. He does have to make a shvua d'oraisa when there is one aid. So one aid cannot bring about punishment, but one aid can bring about shvua. So our Mishnah had that case. Our Mishnah said that if there was one aid that said that she had paid up, so then the halacha is that she would have to make a shvua. And Rami Bar Chama wants to say that it's d'oraisa, and a drasha on this as well. V'amar mar kol makom she'ashnai mechayven oso mamon echad mechayvo shvua. In any particular scenario where two aidim would obligate someone to pay money, one aid will bring about a shvua midoraisa. So this is Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama feels that the shvua is a shvua deoraisa. We already saw the rebuttal of Rava yesterday, and we're going to see it again right now. On my Rava, 5 lines from the bottom, Shtei Tshuvos B'davar, I doubly disagree with you, Rami Bar Chama. Chada, first of all, because the Chol HaNishbain Shebetorah, Nishbain V'lo Mishalmin. The first is, as we learned yesterday, when do we have a shvua that's a din deoraisa? A shvua that's a din deoraisa is always one where one promises and then doesn't pay. It's promising that I don't owe you. It's closing the bank account with a shvua. However, vihi, in this case, she's nishbas v'notelas. In this case, she's saying you still owe me money. So she's making a shvua and collecting. So this is what Rav is saying. Again, we said it yesterday, but I'll just repeat for clarity. There's no such thing as a shvua deoraisa where you make a shvua and then pay. And then take money. That never happens. The only deoraisa shvua is where you make a shvua and then you don't pay. That's what the Gemara says. So that's Rava's first concern with Rami Bar Chama. Furthermore, there's also no shvua deoraisa when it comes to arguments about something that has a lien on it, such as a ksuba, which can be collected from karkos. Ella, therefore, Amar Rava, that the shvua that we're dealing with in our Mishnah is midirabanan, kedei lahafiz daito shel baal. The only reason why we have this particular shvua, it's rabbinic in nature, is so that the husband can be somewhat appeased. I always wondered if the word lahafis and appeased are the same, if in their etymology, historically speaking, because they're very, very similar in the P sound and the S sound are very similar. Lahafis, appease, pius, very similar. There are words like that. Maven, there are words like that have kind of transferred over. Anyways, that's really not for today's share. So the Gemara says that this whole shvua is just in order to make sure that the husband has a little bit of calm in regards to him giving over some money. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa adds, if this person was smart, top of Peches Madal, if he pikeachu, had he been smart, maisi la lidei shvua deoraisa, he would be able to bring about a scenario where it would be a shvua deoraisa. What was the starting point? The starting point was in our Mishnah, where one of the Eidim said that she already paid her ksuba. So Yahiv la ksuva saba apechad sada. He's going to give her a ksuva in front of one aid, the samech sahada kama asahada basra, and then he's going to combine the testimony of person number one, who initially had said she already paid, to sahada basra, to the new aid, who said, "Here's another ksuba." Umokim lahu lahanach kamoi b'malve, and he's going to say that really this husband's going to create a ruse. And he's going to say that really that first loan wasn't a ksuba. Really what was happening is that it was a malveh. So the Gemara has a bunch of problems with this. First of all, the Gemara says 4 lines down, Maski flor of Shisha bereder of Idi, Heach samich sada kama sada basra. How did you combine the first witness and the second witness? The first witness was of the opinion that the document was paid, that the ksuba was already paid. The second witness watched the husband give her a second ksuba. That's not edus on the same thing. We don't just get to arbitrarily combine people and call them witnesses. There are halachic standards. You have to see the same thing, maybe from different vantage points. There are discussions in other Maseches about a person sees something from one corner and you see it from another corner. Is that considered proper edus? But here, we're not even talking about the same time. They're not even overlapping at all, and they witness different things. So the Gemara says, what kind of ruse is this, Rav Papa, that you're able to say that these two Eidim combine? So therefore, the Gemara says in response, Elo Amar Rav Shisha Bereder Rav Idi, Yoiv Laksuvasa Ba'ape Sada Kama Visada Basra. You're right. We're not saying that the person who saw episode 1 and the person who saw episode 2 are now going to testify together. What we're going to say is, person who saw episode 1 and a new person will together witness this giving of the second ksuba. And we'll say that really what happened with that first person, with the first witness, was really a loan and not a regular ksuba. Says the Gemara, but she'll just come to Bezdin, Maskif Lo, Rav Ashi, Akati Yechola Lememar, Beis Kesubos Havai. From her perspective, this looks like 2 ksubas. It looks like she got the first ksuba, she didn't really get fully paid. And the second one was given in front of 2 witnesses. She can just go to Bezdin and collect. This ruse doesn't work at all. And the Gemara says, Ela Amar Rav Ashi, hu demodalahu. Him, he, the husband, all of these pronouns can be very confusing. That's why Rashi is extremely helpful. Here, Rashi halfway down, a little bit of a lengthier Rashi, but he does explain this answer of Rav Ashi very clearly. He told these Eidim about the ruse, and he told them that the first shtar was really for halva purposes and not for ksuba purposes, and this is the ruse of how we can get the shvua to be a shvua de oraisa, because then she's going to make a neder that she doesn't have to pay back the halva, and that is a shvua de oraisa because it's nishbaim v'lo mishalmin, because that was one of Rava's concerns. And that brings us to the first 2 dots. End of mini sugya number 1 for today. We had also said that in a case of nechasim mishubadim, that if someone were to collect from nechasim mishubadim, that they had to collect with a shvua. That's what our Mishnah said on the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Tanan Hasam, we have a Mishnah elsewhere. This Mishnah is found multiple times in Maseches Shvuos, as you can see on the side. V'chein hayasomim. It's not only true about the person who owns these properties, but even his yasomim, even his children. Lo yifru ela b'shvua. That they too cannot get paid from nechasim mishubadim without a shvua. The Gemara is bothered by this. Miman, who are they getting paid from? Ilema milova. If you're saying that they're getting paid back from the person who actually lent them, hashta avi and shakil below shvua. Had the father been alive, if he's taking from someone who he borrowed from, he doesn't have to take a shvua, even if they're nechasim mishubadim. So what case are we dealing with where there's a shvua? Inhu b'shvua, the orphans would have, the assomim would have to take b'shvua. It doesn't even make any sense. If I borrow money from you, and I want to collect my money from the Nechasim Mishubadim, that doesn't make sense. That would be a case where I, the original person, would do it, or my children, the Yisomim, would be able to do that. Ella says the Gemara Hachi Kamar, third of the way down on Peches, Amud Aleph. V'chein hayasomim min hayasomim. You're right, in a regular case, that's true. But if the Yisomim of the Love are trying to collect from the Yisomim of the Malveh, so that's when we have a scenario where we need a shua, because they're both removed. They're both one step removed. And because neither of them are their parent, and there's no person who was actually involved in the original transaction, then lo yifru ella b'shvua. And here we're going to see 2 versions of a qualification of Rav Zerika. Amar Rav Zerika, Amar Reb Yehuda. Lo shanu. What is the case where we learn these rules about the shvua by nechasim mishubadim? Ela she'amru yisomim, where the children of the Loveh said, Amar lanu Abba, our father said, Lavisi uparati. He said, I did lend money. I was lent money, but I paid it back. Aval Amru, but had they said instead, Amar lanu Abba lo livisi, that I never borrowed at all, then af b'shvua lo yifru, then the Yisomim would never be able to collect even with a shvua. The Gemara has a problem with this first version of Rav Zerika. Maskif lo Rava adirabba. We would have said the opposite, because we have a halachic assumption. And this is a little difficult to understand because we just wouldn't have thought it would have been the case. Kol ha'omer lo livisi, anyone who says I didn't borrow any money, it's the same thing as saying k'omer lo parati dami. It's the same thing as saying I didn't pay you back. So if you bring me to Beis Din and say, Phil, you owe me money. If I say the following two sentences, they're halachically the same. I never borrowed money from you and I didn't pay you back. Those are totally different claims. So this requires time in the Rishonim to dig out and really unearth exactly what's going on. But that is what the Gemara says. So therefore, we have to re-understand Rav Zrika. If you're going to say that there was a maimer from Rav Zrika in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, this is what it should be. Halfway down, Amar Rav Zrika, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Lo Shanu, Ela Sha'amru, Yisomim. The only time we have our case of Nechasim Shubadim with a Shvua is when Sha'amru Yisomim, when the Yisomim said, the orphan said, Omar Lanu Abba Lavisi Uparati, I did borrow money and I paid back. Aval Amru, if they would have said, quote, Omar Lanu Abba Lo Livisi, then Nifrain below Shvua, then they pay without a Shvua, Shekola Omer Lo Livisi, Ke Omer Lo Parati Dami. It's the same thing as saying that he never paid. So we flip which quotes are used by the kids, and then our Gemara actually makes sense with the limitations of Rav Zrika. That brings us to the next two dots, which is 2/3 of the way down on Pei Ches Amud Aleph. We had learned the din v'nifrash shelo b'fanav lo tifra ela b'shvua. If a woman is going to get paid from her husband's estate, and she's doing so when her husband is out of town, then it can only be done b'shvua. Amar Rav Acha Sar Habira, which is his name. We've had this name in Shas a few times. Ma'aseh ba lifnei Rabbi Yitzchak be'Antuchya. The Amar lo shanu ela l'ksubas isha mishum china. We only allow for a woman to collect when her husband is out of town with a shvua. However, this story with Rav Yitzchak Antuchya, this is a bit of a machlokes, because what did he hold in regards to an isha? He said with an isha, yes, because of china, because we want her to be under the best of circumstances. When she's being divorced, she has to have a little cash to keep up her makeup routine, to keep up her normal set of standards with clothing. Aval bal chov lo. However, this first approach says that if a man is out of town and his bal chov comes to collect while the man is out of town, he says lo. He's not allowed to collect while the person's out of town. The Rava Amar Rav Nachman says no. Afilu bal chov. Let's say that I borrowed money from you and I went out of town. So I owe you money, but I'm out of town. So according to the first opinion, the bal chov can never get paid back while I'm out of town. Rava says that's completely unreasonable. Shelo yehei kol echad be'echad notel ma'osav shel chaveiro. I could just take her money, go to the Cayman Islands. That's not right. So what Rava was concerned about, and this is a machlokes in the Amoraim, is the following case scenario. I'm out of town and I owe you money. You go to my estate, you go to my accountant, you go to my office manager, and you show up with all the paperwork. It's me, Phil owes me money. So the din is, this is a machlokes. According to some, you're not allowed to collect that money while I'm out of town, period, which is very limiting. And Rava says it's not reasonable. Huh?
Even if there's a date.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Without a shvua, you'd have to. Yeah. So here, but the case of the case that's over here, that's in the Gemara, is that the first shita says we only allow that for Kesubos isha mishum china. We allow her to make a shvua to collect money as a woman. Zero. But Rava rejects that. Rava says that literally, like we would say in our terms, the Cayman Islands, I'm out of town. Or let's just say more practically, you gave me $10,000 in cash and I just get on a plane and leave. So for as long as I'm out of town and I'm out of reach, you can never get paid back. Rava says that's unreasonable. No one will ever lend money because it's so easy to go out of town and just keep the money. This is like one of the things that Rishonim, who are like painting a picture of Rava, will say. Like Rava had like this political sensitivity, like a lens to look through. We've seen like a lot of the Amoraim have this, but Rava here was saying like, you're not looking at it the right way. If you're restrictive here between a Baal Chov and the people, you're creating a nightmare. You're creating a nightmare. No one's going to lend money anymore. I'll lend you $20. I'm not going to lend you $10,000. You'll just leave town and then you'll keep my money. And I'm not even allowed to collect. Too strict.
Is that the problem for the kids also? If the kids are not in town?
Yeah, presumably. This is even making a shvua you're not allowed to collect.
Okay,
That's
but
crazy.
But things change when it's the Asomim.
Could be. I don't know. No, I don't know. I'm presuming that it's not going to be any better with the Asomim. And it's usually a degradation. Yeah. Yeah, it's a little watered down unless the Arusha is super clear. I don't know. I'm just it's a hunch. But that was Rava's spin, is that Rava said no, that you got it wrong. He said it has to be done the right way, and that's not the right way. The last case that we had seen in our Mishnah, it's actually the very top line of Pei Zayin Amud Beis, which is being quoted right here. The top line of Pei Zayin Amud Beis is the last sheet on the Mishnah, and it's quoted right here, Reb Shimon Omer, and we can just read it from there. Reb Shimon Omer on the top right of Pei Zayin says, Kol zman she tovas ksubasa, when she is claiming her ksuba, then hayorshin mashbiyan osa. Ve'im ein tovas ksubasa, and if she isn't claiming her ksuba, so then ein hayorshin mashbiyan osa. Now, in the flow of our Mishnah, it was very difficult to understand what Reb Shimon was talking about. And it wasn't just those of us in the room who struggled a little bit with understanding Reb Shimon, because the Gemara says, Ahaya, Reb Shimon Ahaya, what was he talking about? We don't even know which case. If you look back at the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph at the Mishnah, if you spent 3 minutes reading the bottom Mishnah there, which is a worthwhile exercise, and then compare it to Reb Shimon, we have no clue what Reb Shimon is talking about. And the Gemara provides 1, 2, 3 different responses, which will bring us to the Mishnah at the very bottom of Peiches Mebez, all to understand where Reb Shimon was commenting. So that's what Reb Shimon had said, that if a woman claims her ksuba, then the Yorshin can make a shvua or have to make a shvua. And if she didn't claim her ksuba, the Yorshin are not going to make a shvua. So asks the Gemara 5 lines from the bottom on Peiches Amud Aleph, Reb Shimon Ahaya, which part of our Mishnah was Reb Shimon commenting on? Amar Rav Yirmiyah aha. It was going on the phrase of the Mishnah that read, V'nifras shelo b'fanav. That was the case that we just discussed. Reb Shimon was talking, he was contrasting with the sheet in our Mishnah that said that if the husband is out of town, lo tifra ela b'shvua. And what does the Tana Kama say? Lo shna lemizone, but lo shna leksuba. It doesn't make a difference if they're claiming ksuba or mazon. Doesn't matter. The halacha is that you need to make a shvua. Oh, then ve'asa Reb Shimon lemeimar no. Kol zman shetovas ksuba yorshin mashbianosa. For as long as it's the case that she's being toveh her ksuba, then the yorshin can be mashbia. However, on the top of Peiches Amud Beis, but eina tovas ksubasa. If she's not claiming her ksuba, but rather she's claiming mizonos, and here's our contrast point with the Tana Kama, ein yorshin mashbianosa. So here we see a very clear, much more clear machlokes. It's not clear in the Mishnah, it's clear in the Gemara as to what Reb Shimon is talking about. And in fact, this machlokes has its roots in another brisa. There was a machlokes between a Tana named Chanan and the children of Kohanim Gedolim. Ditznan, the Mishnah writes, and we'll see this Mishnah later in about 6 or 7 blot. Mishahalach leMedina Sayam. Remember, that's what we just said. Reb Shimon's arguing in the case where the husband goes out of town. So the husband's out of town. V'ishta tovas mizonos. This is exactly where the machlokes is between the Tana Kama and Reb Shimon. Chanan Omer tishba b'sof v'lo tishba b'tchila. That we can make her make a shvua at the end, only in regards to the end of the marriage at the ksuba, v'lo tishba b'tchila, but not in the beginning when she makes tainas about food. So that aligns pretty nicely with one shita. And nechleku alav b'nei kohanim gedolim v'amru tishba b'tchila uvesov. She has to make a shvua every time she requests mizonos, and as well when she gets her ksuba. Reb Shimon kechanan. Reb Shimon is just like the opinion of Chanan, and v'Rabbanan, the Tana Kama of our Mishnah, which makes a distinction between mizonos and ksuba. That's kibnei kohanim gedolim. So that's answer number 1 of the Gemara, that Reb Shimon is contrasting against the phrase of our Mishnah that speaks about the husband going out of town and access to food and or ksuba with or without a shvua. That's the machlokes. But the Gemara rejects this in 1 line. Maskif la Rav Sheshes, there's a mistake here. If what you're saying is that Rav Shimon is commenting on the case where the husband is out of town, should it have said, quote, Yorshin mashbiyan osa? It's really not Yorshin under those circumstances, because under those circumstances, it's Bezdin mashbiyan osami boy. The language is wrong. And if you go through the sugya carefully, you'll see that this would be a case where she's claiming from Bezdin. That's the case of the Mishnah, where she's tova as mizonos, because in the Mishnah that we brought at the top of this page between Chanan and the B'nei Kohanim Gedolim, that wasn't talking about a husband's Yorshim, it was talking about Bezdin. So therefore the language must be wrong. Ella, the Gemara moves on to its second answer of how Rav Shimon may fit with our Mishnah. Ella Amar Rav Sheshes, aha. It's actually talking about a different halacha altogether. And it's a halacha that is not found in our Mishnah at all. It's found in a previous Mishnah, and that is a case of, as the Gemara says over here, halcha mikever baila lebeis aviha, that if a woman leaves the burial of her husband and goes back to her father's house, and we learned this already. Or shechazra lebeis chamia v'lo naaseh saputropia, or she goes back to her father-in-law's house where her kids are, where her in-laws live, but she doesn't have any responsibilities. Ein hayorshin mashbian osa, as we learned in the Mishnah a couple of days ago. V'im naaseh saputropia, but if in fact she had responsibilities, then yorshin mashbian osa al ha'asid lavo ve'ein mashbian osa al masha'avar. Then, if in fact she has some household responsibilities, so then the din is that they can ask her to make a shvua on anything that she's doing from today and forward, or as we saw in the Gemara, from the Misa and forward. That was a sheet of Rava that we learned on Shabbos. But they can't make her make a shvua on anything in the past. So the Gemara says, this is where we see our shita in our Mishnah of Reb Shimon. Ve'asa Reb Shimon l'meimar, no. Kolzman shetovas ksubasa. It's not whenever she does any work as an apotropia. It's whenever she claims her ksuba. That's when the yorshin are mashbianosa. However, eina tovas ksubasa, ein hayorshin mashbianosa. And that's really the machlokes. And the reason why this is a little bit complicated is because that Mishnah, my memory serves me right, was it in this exact Mishnah? I think it was in the previous Mishnah on that page. Yeah. So really, and this came up yesterday on Shabbos with Ari, that really the two Mishnayos prior that we learned really should have been taught in one truncated collection instead of separating them. It only got confusing because we separated them, but it happens to be that answer number one is Reb Shimon is actually picking up on the Mishnah from the bottom of Pei Zayin Amud Aleph. Answer number two is he's contrasting with the Mishnah all the way back on the bottom of Pei Vav Amud Aleph. It's fine. It's okay that they're in different Mishnayos, but we just have to hold cup to remember that Reb Shimon was really answering, according to this version of the Gemara, Rav Shesh's response, he's contrasting with the Mishnah from two Mishnahs ago. And V'kamiflage, we're just about halfway down on Peches Mid Beis, this machlokas between Reb Shimon and our Mishnah. And the case of Halcha Mikever Baila from two Mishnayos ago, that's really Beplugda the Abashal V'Rabbanon. This is actually similar. It has its roots in a previous machlokas. Titnan, apotropis sheminuhu aviyasomim yishava. If there's an apotropis that the father appointed before he died, then the yisomim can make that person make a shvua. Minuhu bezdin lo yishava. That's the Tanakama, that if Bezdin would have appointed it, then there's no shvua. And Abashal Amar chiluf hadvarim. Abashal reversed the shitas, and minuhu bezdin yishava, minuhu aviyasomim lo yishava. And that was the reversal of this shita actually paints the following picture. Reb Shimon is ke'aba shaul. Reb Shimon was of the opinion that you can't always make them make a shvua, and it can only be with a ksuba. That's Reb Shimon all the way. V'Rabbanan ke'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan in this Mishnah, the Tanakama of this Mishnah in the middle of Peches Mid Beis is like the shita of the Rabbanan, which, as we saw, that as long as she's an apotropia in her father-in-law's home, then a shua is allowed to be made. But even here, the Gemara says, Maskifla Abaye, another one-liner that rejects, it can't be right. The language of Reb Shimon is wrong. If what you're saying is that we're really comparing back to the case of Halcha Mikever Baila, it shouldn't say Kolzman Shetovas Ksubasa, that any time, it shouldn't have been, that's not the right language. It should have just been Im Tovas Mi Baile. It's just a question of what she did. It's not like you're dropping a hard and fast Kolzman. That's not what's going on. It's just if she's asking for a ksuba, I disagree with you. So that's what the Gemara says. And therefore, the Gemara turns to its third and final response as to how we can understand the sheet of Reb Shimon, and that is as follows. Really, the response of Reb Shimon in our Mishnah from the top of Pei Zayin and Beis is going back to Mishnayos to talk about another sugya. What had we said? Kasavla, if a husband writes the following to his wife, Neder u'shvua ein li alayich. He says, I have no neder and no shvua, you have no obligations to me. So we had said in that Mishnah, Eino yachol lehashbiya v'chulei. That's what was the first part of the Mishnah. The next part of the Mishnah said, Neder u'shvua ein li below the yorshai, below the baim birshusei alayich val yorshayich val habaim birshusei. So we had said in that case where he gave a much more broad exemption from nedarim and shvuos. What was the halacha there? That ein yachol hashpia Kippur is going to be a disaster. Says the Gemara, Ein yachol lehashpia lohu velo yorshav velo habayin birshuso lohi velo yorshev velo habayin birshuso. No one can make any shuas. No one from his party and no one from her party. Here is where Reb Shimon rears his shita. Reb Shimon lememar calls man shetovas ksubasa yorshin mashpianosa. Only when there is a claim of a ksuba, that's when there can be a yerusha. But you're correct. If you give that sweeping language of neder ushvua, that none of my people can give a shvua to any of your people, you're right. In general, that would be true, except Reb Shimon's exception is ksuba. If she claims her ksuba, that's where Reb Shimon's shita comes in. The kamiflage, this actually is reminiscent of the machlokas we learned yesterday. Beplugta to Abba Shaul ben Ima Miriam, the Rabbanon, where Reb Shimon would be ka Abba Shaul, the Rabbanon ke Rabbanon. So says the Gemara, this is all well and good except for one thing. It only accounts for the first half of Reb Shimon's shita. The first half of Reb Shimon's shita was that if she's claiming ksuba, then there can be yorshim. Maskif lo, Rav Papa, hatenach kozman shetovas ksuba. I understand. Reb Shimon is coming in to counter the shita of the Rabbanon by saying, no, it's not totally a clean slate of no nadarim and no shvuas. As long as she's asking for a ksuba, she can get what she needs. So it says the Gemara, but what does it mean? Eina tovas ksuba ma'ikol meimar. And the Gemara says, Elo Amar Rav Papa la'afu came to Rabbi Eliezer u'machlu kaso. Remember the shita that we learned about Rabbi Eliezer, that a husband can make a wife make a shvua whenever he wants, even on pilcha and even on isasa. Excuse me, how much thread did you use, sweetheart? Make a shvua. How much money did you use at the store today? Make a shvua. And many of us were bothered by that's not normal. That's not the way marriages work. And the Gemara rejected that outright. Anyways, the Rabbanan. Not the Gemara, the Rabbanan that didn't agree with the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. So what the Gemara is saying is that Reb Shimon is coming to contrast the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says that we're allowed to make her make a shvur whenever we want. And what would Rabbi Shimon say in response to that? Absolutely not. He's on the other end of the pendulum swung entirely. Rabbi Eliezer says you can make her make a shvur on everything. And Rabbi Eliezer comes along and says, only on a ksuba. Only on a ksuba. Pilcha, absolutely not. Isasa, she's making challah. How much flour did you use? Absolutely not. A little bit of a mechudash answer, because it means, when you look at this the right way, what it means is that the shita of Rabbi Eliezer was split over two parts of the Mishnayos. The first comment of Rabbi Eliezer, which is the comment of Kol Zman Shitovas Ksuba Hayorshin Mashpian Osa, that's to contrast one shita, the Neder Shvua Gemara, Neder Shvua Mishnah. And the second part of his shita was to talk about Rabbi Eliezer and the scope of when he's allowed to make a shvua. Difficult Mishnah, very difficult.
I'm not sure it's clear.
Sometimes even Kahati is different than Shas. That's for sure. Yeah, that happens all the time. But this particular Gemara, this Gemara would be hard either way in regards to how to understand Rabbi Eliezer. But it was even harder for learners like us because it went back 2 or 3 Mishnayos, and that's for us is hard. Usually in our brains we're like, okay, we're moving on now. But that's our learning error. Like had we known Shas Mishnayos Balpeh, which Ben Chamesh Lamikra, whatever. Halavai, Zilbermans. So had it been that we've known the Mishnayos properly, we wouldn't have struggled as much, or we wouldn't have struggled as much in Shas in general, but okay, for another time. Says the Gemara, bottom line of Pei Chesamid Beis, we're actually going to learn the next full Amud, and we'll wrap around to the top of Pei Chesamid Beis so we can prepare for tomorrow night. Hotzia get, the Eini Imo Ksuba. So there's a get, but there's no Ksuba. The halacha is Gova Ksubasa. She's still allowed to collect the money for her Ksuba. Obviously, if they're talking gittin, there must have been a ksuba somewhere, right? So it's time to get divorced. So I can't find my ksuba, but there's a get. So obviously you got married. So she's gonna be able to collect her ksuba. What about ksuba ve'eni ma get? That's a different story. So if you have ksuba but no get, he omeres ovad giti, I am divorced. You really do owe me money, but I lost my get. Vehu omer ovad shovri, I paid you, but I just can't find the receipt. So who do we believe? And similarly, Baal Chov Shehoti Shtar Chov Ve'eni Mo Prizbal. Pretty cool. The Gemara speaks about Prizbal like right in this perfect kufa of Aser Simei Tshuva of the Tafshin Pei Gimel. And if there's a Baal Chov who's hotzi shtarcho, he presents his shtarcho, but ve'eni mo pruzbo, and therefore, as we know that at the end of every shemitah cycle, all the loans are canceled. Hare elu lo yifru. That's it. They're out. They're out money. It's a big loss. However, Rashbag Omer, mina sakana ve'elech, from the times that there were sakana, and we'll define that in a minute with Rashi, isha gova ksubasa shelo beget, she can still collect her ksuba even if there is no get, ubalcho gova shelo bepruzbo. Oh my gosh. You can still collect something even if there's no pruzbo. It's like undermining the institution of Hillel, mitchila ve'ad sofa, gone, and then it's as if it's crazy. It's really crazy. So what's sakana? So Rashi, a quarter of the way down on the page, about 20 lines down on the page, Dibur Hamaskal mina sakana says, as we've had many times in our history, shegazru ovdei kochavim al hamitzvos, v'hayu yureim lishmor gitehen. People were afraid to keep their religious documents. Umisha kibalto sorafto, v'chein pruz belehen. So they had the shtaros. She was just afraid to keep a get, because if she kept the get and then they saw the get, then it's a big problem. In many of these countries, certainly the way the Rambam learned the sugya about hair covering, it's pretty clear that in the Arabic countries, the women their headdresses were very similar to the Jews and the non-Jews. They were wearing whatever, the hijab, whatever the right language was, but they were very similar from one to the other. Think about how women wear their hair now in the frum community. They're shaitels, but they look a lot like dolled up hairs. It's the same thing. They look very similar. It's probably very similar in other countries as well. So it may not have been through the optics that you could necessarily tell who was Jewish and who was not. Everyone's wearing long gowns, and it was hard to tell. But because they wanted to pile on against the Jews, they said, if we ever find the frum shtar, you guys are dead. So they said, fine, you give me the get, I'm going to collect the money, then I'm burning the get, so I don't have to worry about them finding it. So Rashbag in our Mishnah was concerned about some of the practical implications of living in a time of sakana, where there were oppressive regimes who were very, very sharp against the Jews. And therefore he said, I'm undoing some of the normal rules. And therefore, just to review his shita again, Isha gova ksuvasa shelo beget, and balchov gova shelo bepruzbo. Upruz belehen, yeah. There's a very frum document, because it basically said that the Torah indicates that really all the loans are batel, but we wrote a pruzbal that they shouldn't be batel. That's frum. In a secular court, that there should ever be a bittul of a loan just because a time on the calendar hit. That's very religious. Says the Gemara, as we open here, Shmamina kosvin shover. An implication from our Mishnah is that it must be that we are kosvin shover, that when a husband pays out a ksuba, that we write him a receipt in Bezdin. Bezdin says, we see over here that person X paid his wife a ksuba. The ein kosvin shovar. If in fact we didn't write a shovar, we didn't write a receipt for the husband, lechosh, maybe we should be concerned. Dilma mafkala l'ksuvasa v'gavyaba. She could recollect with her ksuba. If she's holding a ksuba that says you owe me 200 zuz, and he has no paperwork to indicate that he paid anything, and she's even the slightest bit of a swindler, she'll come to Bezdin every couple of weeks, and she'll go to different Batei Din every couple of weeks, so she doesn't repeat the same crime in the same place. She could collect, she can make a killing. It's a document that knows no end. So there. I don't know if you would let it go past one. How do you stop it? A shover. That's why the Gemara says it must be that we write a shover, because of that logic. There has to be a checks and balances system. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Amarav, maybe it's b'makom she'ein kosvin ksuva askina. We know that the institution of a ksuba that we have is all derabanan, and the whole concept of a ksuba was to prevent husbands from flippantly divorcing their wives. We put a financial burden on them. You can't just walk away. You have to take care of her. You have to afilu min glima de al kasvai, like we read in our ksubas today. Even from the clothes on your back, she's the priority. You have to remember historically what a paradigm shift this is from basically every culture around the world. Like to have such a language in a star in the mother tongue wherever we were living, to say that you have to, even the code, like it's a different language, different world. Anyways, Rav says that maybe this was at a time where there was no ksuba, so we don't have to worry about her reusing the ksuba. There was no paper document, so because she didn't have a paper document, he didn't need a paper document. So maybe we don't have a proof from here that the husband gets a shover. Ushmuel amar af b'makom shekosvin ksuba. We would even say the same thing in regards to a place of kosvin ksuba that she gets Ushmuel amar af b'makom shekosvin ksuba. What does that mean? Therefore, what? Af b'makom shekosvin ksuba. They don't. You still have to write a shover. What's af?
Even in other words, we said the first thing he said was that it's the makom she'ein kosvin ksuba. Right? Shover is there for that case.
Yeah.
Shmuel says, no. Even a place where you wrote a ksuba, you have to write a shover separate.
No,
No matter what, you have to do it.
the chiddush would be in the case where it's a makom shelo kosvin ksuba,
Why you say that?
because there's
In
no
other
need
words,
for it.
Where there's no ksuba written, there's no proof whatsoever.
Either way,
Write a
either
ksuba,
way.
At least the husband can take the ksuba back, and she won't have it to take out anymore. After marriage,
Can you say that again, please?
if you don't write a ksuba, right, she shows up and says, you owe me money,
Mhm.
right? So you better have a shover. If we write a ksuba, I have a solution. We don't have to write a shover. Let the husband take the ksuba away when he pays, and she can't go running to the next base then with a ksuba.
But af b'makom shekosvin ksuba is not
You
that he
need a
take.
shover,
Yeah, they get the shover.
that you need a shover. You really don't need one. Pay the money, take the ksuba, and she can no longer show up in base then with the ksuba.
Look at the first Rashi on the page. I know this is not directly our sugya, but it's from our Mishnah. Rashi dibra maschal govek subasa. Ve'eno yachol liton.
Let's see it get the 80 emo. Ksuba, go back, ksuba.
Yeah. Rashi says ve'eno yachol liton. He cannot claim piraticha ve'chzartli shtar ksuba sech ukrativ. V'shum detznai ksuba ma'isa bezdin. He can't even claim that he received the ksuba. I know the Gemara means what you mean, because the next question, I'm just now that I'm saying it out loud, the language of af is bothering me a little bit, but I know it has to be that way, because the next question of the Gemara is Shmuel Kosman Shover. I understand, like, that's what's happening, but the language of af is bugging me a little bit. Shtar ksuba sech v'krativ. You gave me your star. He can't say, this is a different part of the Mishnah. Okay, let's just continue. I'll do some research on my own. Ushmuel amar af b'makom shekosvin ksuba, that yes, we will still give him a shover. Shmuel kosvin shover? Is it in fact the case that Shmuel would agree that the bezdin will write a shover, a receipt for the husband? Amar Rav Anan, ledidi mifresh alimine demar Shmuel. I heard explicitly from Shmuel the following: b'makom she'ein kosvin v'amar kasavti. If you live in a city where the custom is that we don't write ksuvas, they're just oral ksuvas, and the husband wants to say kasavti, then alav lahaviraya. That's his responsibility. Because you're saying that it's a paper trail. No, this is not a place of paper trail. You need to, the burden of proof is on you. And on the flip side, b'makom shekosvin, if it's a place where the custom is to write a ksuba, the amra, and she wants to say lo kasavli. Here in Chicago, we write ksubas, and she says, my husband's a jerk, he never wrote me a ksuba. Aleha lahaviraya. Okay, that's a pretty logical conclusion. The af Rav Hadarbe, even Rav retracted his initial shita, as we saw earlier. The Amar Rav, bein b'makom shekosvin, bein b'makom she'ein kosvin. Whether or not the couple got married in a city where they write a ksuba or they don't write a ksuba, if she has the get, then gova ikr. If she has the get, then she can collect the 200 or 100 dues, whatever the ikr value of the ksuba is. And if she has the ksuba, then she's gove tosefes. Remember, we spoke about this difference between ikr and tosefes. Ikr is either 100 or 200 respectively, bu'ula basula, and tosefes is whatever more money the husband was kind enough to throw in. So Rav makes this distinction, and he says that if you have the ksuba, you get the ikr, and if you have the get, you have the ikr, and if you have the ksuba, you get the tosefes. And then he throws down the gavel and says, if anybody wants to come ask me a question, I'm telling you that I'm right. So then the Gemara is like, okay, I think I'm going to ask you a question. And the Gemara asks a question against Rav. It's not. We have a Mishnah. Which Mishnah is it? Our Mishnah. What does our Mishnah say? Ksuba ve'eni maget. We had said, Hi omeres avad giti v'hu omer avad shovri. In a case where she has the ksuva, but she doesn't have a get, this is the very top line of this page repeated here, and she says, I lost my get, and he says, nope, I lost my shover. And similarly, in regards to a balchov shehotzi shtarchov ve'enimo pruzbal harei lo yifro, we had said that they're missing their paperwork, and they can't collect their money. Now, Bishlama l'Shmuel, I could understand how to understand Shmuel in regards to our Mishnah. Muki labamakom she'ein kosvin v'amar kasafti da amri le, I see raya. Our Mishnah is just simply dealing with a case where it was a place where they didn't write anything, and he's saying there was a paper trail. Good, then provide the paper trail. But this is a city where we don't write these things down, so that's not my problem. The burden of proof is on the man. It's on the husband in this case. V'lo ma'isi raya, amrina leis. You'll pray. If you can't prove that you already paid, then fork it over. It's just the burden of proof is upon you. And that's because we live in this city where there is no ksuba that's written up.
That's every case of ksuba in that city. There's no documents.
Yeah, there's no ksubas. Yeah.
It's not necessarily a fight between
Yeah. No, she made an error when they got married. She should have said, I want it in writing if that's the custom of my city. And if it's not, then she can't ask for it.
Right.
We just have to be a chacham. We don't have marriages now without a written ksuba. We would redo the ksuba in 1/10 of a second with their smallest error. Ladina, does it actually matter if the ksuba is missing? Maybe not, but it's not good for her because she needs tonight bezdin because we want to take care of her. We want to make sure she's protected. But yes, that's correct. So we're talking, this is a strange culture for us, but that's what Shmuel says is the case of our Mishnah. So Shmuel's kaftor v'ferach, he works out beautifully for our Mishnah. But Rav, who said, and if you have any questions, come ask me. So says the Gemara, 4 lines from the bottom. Ela Rav, nehi de ikar lo gavya, because in our case, there was no get. So without the get, you can't create a scenario where she can create the ikar, that we understand. But tosefes mia tigbi, but because she has the ksuba, she should be able to get the tosefes even without the ikar. So Rav doesn't fit into our Mishnah. Because according to Rav, our Mishnah should have at least given the Tosefes, even if not the Iker of the Ksuba. So how does Rav fit? Amar Rav Yosef Hacha b'mayaskinan. Here, what are we dealing with? Kishe'ein sham ede gerushin. There was a get, but there's no edim for the gerushin. And migu the yachol memar. Logi rashtiha, because he's able to say that I didn't divorce you. He could equally claim that I paid you, but it's a migu. I could have argued I could have given a much simpler argument that would have put me scot-free. So here, when I say this one, you should trust me. So the Gemara therefore seems to say that there were no edim. That's how we could make Rav fit with our Mishnah. But the Gemara is bothered by this. Line 2, Pei Testament Beis, and we're going to learn about 8 or 9 more lines and then stop. Hamidikatani Seifa, the problem is that at the end of our Mishnah, we learned about the Shita of Rashbag. Rashbag Omer Minas Sakana Ve'elech, that from the time that the Jews were oppressed, or at any time when the Jews are oppressed, the halacha is Isha Gova Ksuvasa Shelo Beget, Ubal Chov Shelo Bepruzbo. As we had said in our Mishnah, that in a time of Sakana, that a woman can collect her ksuba even without a get, and a man can collect his chov even without a pruzbol. That must be b'di'ika ede gerushin askina. There's no way she's going to collect without a get, without edim having some frame of reference for her. There must have been edim. The ileka ede gerushin b'may gavya. How do we even know she's divorced? We need something, even if there's no get, but at least the guys who signed the get, the guys who witnessed the masira of the get, something. She's just saying, I'm divorced, give me money. There needs to be something. So therefore, the Gemara says it must be that our Mishnah is dealing with a case where there were Eidei Gerushin. So the answer that you tried to give for Rav to make Rav fit into our Mishnah doesn't work. Ella, it must therefore be, says the Gemara, and we'll be stopping with this answer, though it's a 6-line answer. Ella kula rashbagi. Really, everything in our Mishnah is Rashbag. How then would we understand it? Really, there's some text missing in our Mishnah. Here's the right way to read it. This case of the woman who doesn't have her documents, or a man who doesn't have his pruzbol, they don't get paid by medvar mamurim. That's only kshein shamei gerushin. That's only if there are no ede gerushin. Aval yesh shamei gerushin gavya tosefes. That would be appropriate. Even according to Rab, that would work. The ikar, what about the 100 and the 200 that she should be owed from her ksuba? Imafka gita gavya. If she can pull a get out of her portfolio and say, here's my get, here it is, then she can collect it. Be lo mafkagita lo gavya. Sounds great. And it's just paperwork. You just have to provide it. But from the time that the Jews were oppressed, so we had tried to figure out a way to learn Rav and Shmuel into our Gemara. Rav was very difficult to learn into our Mishnah, and the Gemara actually concludes that our whole Mishnah, from the very bottom line of Peches Amud Beis, of Hotziah Get Beni Moksuva, all the way to the end is really Rashbag. It looks like there's more than one shita because it says Rashbag Omer, and really the Gemara is saying Chasurim Mechzer v'Hachiktani. The text of our Mishnah needs to be modified. Rashbag is the author of this entire Mishnah. We're going to stop right here, and Yirtzeh Hashem tomorrow night we'll learn the rest of this Amud and all of Daf Tzadi, and then what's the next day? Tuesday? Today's Sunday. Monday, and then Tuesday morning we'll have a shiur that will be Yom Kippur's Daf, and then we won't learn again until the day after Yom Kippur. Wishing you all a beautiful night.